After sitting in the can and being ready for release for almost a year, Kraven the Hunter is finally out, to complete an utter box office humiliation, underperforming even its flop-tacular predecessors, Morbius and Madame Web. While Sony obviously will keep the Spider-Man rights and license third parties like Marvel Studios to make more Spider-Man movies taking place in the MCU for them, Kraven the Hunter by all outwardly appearances closed the book on their live-action villain-centric Spider-Man spin-off movies not featuring Spider-Man. And recent rumors suggesting that the license agreement with Marvel allowed them to use Spider-Man all along retroactively makes them look like idiots. It's time to look back and see what went wrong. Kraven is not just one movie gone wrong, it's the culmination of more than a decade's worth of filmmaking gone wrong, so to fully appreciate what went wrong here, we have to go back to the very beginning. Famously, Sony got the movie rights in the 90s, in a deal which may have looked like a raw deal at first glance, but which in actuality set the stage for Ike Perlmutter and Avi Arad to elevate lowly comic book publisher Marvel from its bankruptcy ashes into the biggest entertainment brand in history, bar none. Such an achievement did require a few Faustian deals though, and functionally selling the Spider-Man movie rights to Sony was one of them. To begin with, this deal was even highly beneficial, netting the newly rescued Marvel millions in annual retainer fees, plus tens of millions whenever Sony released a Spider-Man film, starting with Sam Raimi's Spider-Man in 2002. Avi Arad even wanted to keep it that way for the foreseeable future. Things didn't become an issue until Ike Perlmutter wanted more of those hundreds of millions the film production companies that made Marvel licensed movies got, and started the path towards making Marvel Studios. As we covered in our video detailing the rise of Marvel Studios and the MCU, linked to in the description. Shortly after the formation of Marvel Studios, there was a falling out, at which point Avi Arad left Marvel. He was contractually locked in with the Spider-Man movies though, so rather than retire completely, he opted to instead work for Sony and then head honcho Amy Pascal on creating more Spider-Man movies, now in direct competition with the MCU. Together with producer Matt Tolmach, Avi Arad and Amy Pascal decided that rather than continuing the Sam Raimi continuity, they would reboot altogether with a cheaper cast and behind-the-scenes talent with The Amazing Spider-Man. They could, of course, have taken the James Bond direction, same as the comic book does whenever there's a radical new creative team, and keep the continuity or just change the look, but nope, they decided to scrap everything and start over, with a new origin story and everything. This, in my opinion, is where the seeds of destruction were first sown. While Marvel were establishing and building up their own continuity over the course of the Phase 1 Origin movies, which were being released as The Amazing Spider-Man was being developed, Sony had just ditched their continuity. Come 2012, the shared continuity between Marvel's seemingly separate Phase 1 Origin movies was put on full display in The Avengers, which rocked the world and forever changed the cinema landscape. Later that year, The Amazing Spider-Man, the reboot which had just jettisoned 3 movies worth of continuity, did well for its budget, but underperformed relative to expectations, and it underperformed big time compared with the upstart The Avengers. And yes, as the calendar rolled into 2012, The Avengers was indeed an upstart, and many a box office analyst at the time predicted that The Amazing Spider-Man would come up on top between the two. For Sony, it was time for a quick rethink, which ended with even more seeds of destruction being planted. Reacting to the overnight takeover of the MCU, Amy Pascal, Avi Arad and Matt Tolmach decided to respond with a cinematic universe of their own, and their master plan was the Sinister Six. This would be their Avengers, the culmination of multiple solo movies, all to be set up in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. To ensure they got it just right, they enlisted the help of Alex Kurtzman, the to-be destroyer of Star Trek. The end result of this endeavor was not only a career setback from which then rising star Dane DeHaan would never recover, but a movie that underperformed so badly that it, combined with Sony's many other struggles at the time, led to the adults in the room at Sony mandating that a deal with Marvel Studios be made, which would see them, with their track record, make Spider-Man movies for Sony set in the MCU. Amy Pascal, who was in the process of being fired at that time, was also able to get a cushy deal, locking herself in with all Spider-Man production, just like Avi Arad before her. But not content with letting Marvel Studios take care of Spider-Man, the deal also allowed Sony to make their own Spider-Man spin-off movies. Movies that wouldn't technically be part of the MCU, but which Sony had every intention of conning the audience into thinking that they were.
Well, those movies will all take place in the world that we are now creating for Peter Parker. I mean, there'll be adjuncts to it. They may be different locations, but it will still all be in the same world, and they will be connected to each other as well.
And these adjuncts would all lead towards that Sinister Six Avengers-level crossover event that Avi Arad, Matt Tolmach, and Amy Pascal were fabling about. Sony's solo venture began for real in 2018, with the release of Venom, which was a surprise hit. I maintain that movie worked for two reasons. First and foremost, the odd couple interaction between Eddie Brock and the Venom symbiote, which is the only reason why Tom Hardy got away with chewing the scenery the way that he did. Plus, while Venom's origin is intimately tied with that of Spider-Man in the comics, he soon branched out on his own and has done so for decades in the comics now, which is something the movie could latch onto and still retain some level of legitimacy. Beyond those upsides, Venom clearly displayed the problems which would come to characterize everything that Avi Arad, Matt Tolmach, and Amy Pascal would come to produce. All their Marvel movies were, in a sense, trapped 2 decades in the past. Take away the aforementioned aspects that worked with Venom, and the rest of the movie had about the same level of story and structure sophistication as a comic book movie from the era of the first X-Men from the year 2000 or Daredevil from 2003. It was a relic from before the formula for how to crack a successful comic book movie had been unlocked. The movie simply did not have the level of story and structure sophistication that audiences have come to expect of comic book movies since 2005's Batman Begins, and this problem recurred in all of their subsequent movies. As such, the first Venom was a fluke, and as good as it was ever going to get, both creatively and at the box office. 2021's Venom Let There Be Carnage had the same problem, and it underused Carnage, disappointing the fans of the first movie. 2022's Morbius also felt like a relic from the era of the first Underworld from 2003, and not even the post-credit scene of the Vulture hopping in from the MCU, further setting up what else, the Sinister Six, could save it. Madame Web was the final release version of Amy Pascal's female-centric Glass Ceiling movie, a girl boss Spider-Man spin-off movie that no one other than Amy Pascal had ever asked for, and which the audience actively recoiled from by the time it was released. Because by then, audiences everywhere had had it up to here with girl bosses. This year's Venom The Last Dance would have been a much bigger hit had Let There Be Carnage not squandered so much of the first Venom's goodwill. Instead, it saw the exit of the one success story that Arad, Tolmach, and Pascal had, and it introduced the big Thanos-level threat that the Sinister Six eventually would have to go up against in their Avengers-level event, at the time when no one cared any longer. This then leads us to Kraven the Hunter, a movie audiences worldwide wrote off without seeing and without ever giving a chance. While few saw it to find out for themselves, those who did reported numerous problems with the movie, all of which boil down to the same problem that has plagued all the other movies directly preceding Kraven. The writing and sophistication of storytelling belongs in 2002, not 2024. And to be clear, it would have been schlock in 2002 as well, but back then it would have been entertaining schlock, and well received by the same audience who enjoyed Dracula 2000 and the first Resident Evil. Today, it simply doesn't measure up. The bigger problem for Kraven though was that the MCU has lost its way. DC never found theirs, and Sony themselves only ever lucked out with Venom. The end result of all of that is an audience fed up with comic book movies, and who will only show up when they know they're in for a treat, like with Deadpool and Wolverine. Against that backdrop, Kraven never stood a chance. It was long believed that Spider-Man was off-limits to Sony, and indeed we only have one report claiming differently. No one outside of the parties involved know for sure. But let's for argument's sake that they could have used Spider-Man but chose not to. If so, I'm honestly glad that they didn't, because it wouldn't have helped. The movies would still have been made by Avi Arad, Matt Tolmach and Amy Pascal. While Arad has proven his mettle as a businessman and deserves credit for that, as producers, the three have proven themselves incapable of producing anything other than schlock that was dated by 2005. Their problem was their obsession with the Sinister Six and creating nonsensical, out-of-time and out-of-touch origin stories building towards a Sinister Six crossover event, Marvel Phase 1 style, but with pre-Phase 1 story sophistication. Putting Spider-Man into those movies wouldn't have saved them. On the contrary, it would have dragged Spider-Man down with them. By all accounts, this whole Spider-Man-free Spider-Man spin-off cinematic universe is now over, as there are no further movies in development. Tom Rothman, current Sony head honcho, is done throwing good money after bad. Sony aren't done with Spider-Man though. Sony will continue the animated Spiderverse, which did work out for them, courtesy of Lord and Miller. That even spawned a live-action Spider-Noir series with Nicolas Cage, fully paid for and distributed by Amazon. All Sony has to do there is collect paychecks. Likewise, Sony now has every incentive to keep Spider-Man in the MCU, where they don't make the movies, but they do collect the paychecks. Ironically, that now leaves Sony in the same position Marvel Comics were 20 years ago. In short though, Spider-Man isn't going anywhere. It's the movies about his villains that are gone. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments.